Hey guys, welcome back in to the space between. Tonight, I actually want to talk to you about something I've been working on, kind of like wrestling with for about, well, almost exactly a month now. Um, the State of the Union address was on February 24th. Today is March 24th, so I've had a month to kind of like think about it, think about what like my reaction to it is without all the hype, without all the loudness of it to really kind of let it sink in. And so tonight's going to be kind of a deep dive into kind of some of the feelings that I and probably many other um, Americans felt if they watched it. Now, I will let you know I didn't listen to any commentary at all. Um, right, left, center, nothing. I just kind of watched it, pondered it, and then kind of wrote what I'm going to share with you tonight. So, the State of the Union address and what happens when the rituals fail. It was a moment that was supposed to be ceremonial, stabilizing, and unifying, but instead revealed a deep fracture right in front of our eyes. A moment where the president declared with full confidence that the state of our union is strong, even as the room itself contradicted that very claim in every direction that you looked. Because if you watch the broadcast, not the commentary, not the spin, not the post speech analysis, but the actual live event, the body language, the interruptions, the reactions, the tension, then you saw something that didn't match the script. You saw a chamber that wasn't aligned, wasn't unified, and honestly, they weren't even pretending to be. And that disconnect between the words being spoken and the reality unfolding on screen is what made the declaration feel to many viewers not just unconvincing, but almost blasphemous against the truth of the moment of what we were actually seeing in real time. The State of the Union is traditionally a ritual of shared civic space. Even in years of disagreement, there's usually a baseline of decorum, applause at predictable beats, polite silences at others, and a general willingness to at least perform unity for the sake of the institution. But this year, that performance totally collapsed. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't hidden, it wasn't something you needed a political science degree to decode. It was right there in the open on national television. We had a president who leaned into confrontation, responded to, excuse me, responding to reactions from the chamber in real time. You had Democrats who refused to applaud, refused to stand, and in some cases openly protested. You had moments where the president's remarks were met with not only silence, but with visible rejection, shaking heads, crossed arms, and expressions that communicated exactly how little agreement existed in the room. At one point, a Democratic lawmaker was escorted out after protesting during the speech. That alone tells you how far from the norms we've shifted. And through all of this, the president continued to frame his administration's actions as victories, as wins, that in his telling should have been obvious, celebrated, and acknowledged by everyone present. However, the refusal of the Democrats to validate those claims became part of the spectacle. Their silence, their stillness, their refusal to applaud, it all fed into the dynamic and became fuel for the president's jabs. And those jabs became fuel for their resistance. It was a loop of ridicule and rejection playing out in real time. But the moment that pushed the instability into full view was when the president turned his attention to the judicial branch, specifically the Supreme Court's ruling on the tariffs. In front of the justices seated only a few feet away, he criticized their decisions and then announced that he'd found a workaround, that he had discovered a way to bypass the court's limitations and move forward anyway. For many viewers, that wasn't just another political jab, it was a signal, a reminder of how strained the relationship between the branches of government had become. The State of the Union is one of the rare moments in our country where all three branches sit in the same room, symbolically equal, symbolically cooperative. But in that moment, the symbolism cracked. You had the executive branch publicly challenging the judicial branch and doing it in a way that suggested the court's authority was an obstacle to be maneuvered around rather than a constitutional check to be respected. And the reaction in the room reflected that tension. Democrats seized on it as further evidence of institutional instability. Republicans applauded, maybe a little too long. The justices remained stone still, as they always do, but the contrast between their silence and the president's confidence in his workaround only heightened the sense that the branches were no longer aligned, that the balance of power itself was being tested in real time. When you add that moment to the already charged atmosphere, the ridicule, the protest, the refusal to acknowledge the administration's claimed wins, the declaration that the Union was strong became even harder to reconcile with what viewers were witnessing. Because strength just isn't about economic numbers or policy achievements. Strength is also about the stability of institutions, the respect between branches, the ability of the government to function without one branch undermining another in front of the entire nation. Strength doesn't look like a president mocking the opposition from the podium. Strength doesn't look like an opposition so unwilling to acknowledge the administration's framing of the country that they would rather sit stone-faced through claims of national progress. And strength certainly doesn't look like the executive branch publicly challenging the judicial branch and announcing a workaround to its rulings during the most symbolic constitutional gathering of the year. Strength just doesn't look like a chamber that can't agree on the premise of the night. Strength doesn't look like a government that can't even pretend to be unified for an hour or two. It wasn't a long speech. Strength doesn't look like a State of the Union where the Union itself is the most visibly fractured thing in the room. And that's the heart of the contradiction. The message said one thing, the moment showed another, and millions of Americans felt that tension, not because they were not told to, not because of commentary afterward, because the evidence was right there in the broadcast. The State of the Union is supposed to be a mirror. It's supposed to reflect where we are, what we've overcome, and what we're willing to build toward. But this year, the mirror cracked. What we saw wasn't strength. What we saw was a government so polarized that even the rituals designed to mask division couldn't hold. We saw a president who used the address not just to outline policy, but to spar with the opposition. We saw Democrats who refused to play along with the traditional choreography of applause and acknowledgement. We saw a chamber where the two sides weren't just disagreeing, they were inhabiting different realities entirely. And we saw a president challenge the Supreme Court in a way that underscored just how fragile the balance between branches had become. And that's why the Declaration felt hollow to so many viewers, because strength isn't something you can declare into existence, it's something you demonstrate. Something you embody. It's something that shows up in the way leaders speak to each other, the way institutions function, and the way elected officials where they share space even when they disagree. What we saw instead was a breakdown of shared narrative, a breakdown of shared purpose, a breakdown of the basic civil choreography that holds these events together. The president said the Union was strong, the room said otherwise. And that's where we begin. So, our next segment is going to be about what the center sees. Because if you stand in the center, not the political center, not the I'm on both sides center, but the human center, you start to see something different. You start to see that what broke down in that room wasn't just decorum, it wasn't just civility, it wasn't even just politics. What broke down was the shared story. The story that says, listen, we may disagree, but we still live in the same country. We may argue, but we still share the same institutions. We may fight, but we still believe in the idea of a union. That story, the one that's supposed to hold us together when everything else is pulling us apart, it wasn't even present in the room. And when the story collapses, the ritual collapses with it. From the center, you don't watch that moment and think one side is right and the other is wrong. You watch that moment and think, we are losing the ability to see each other at all. Because the center isn't about neutrality. It's about clarity. It's about honesty. It's about naming what's real, even if it doesn't fit neatly into a right or left frame. And what was real in that room was fragmentation, not just disagreement. not just tension, but disconnection, not just polarization, but a complete breakdown of shared meaning. When the president mocked Democrats, that wasn't strength. When Democrats refused to acknowledge any wins, well, that wasn't strength either. When the president challenged the Supreme Court in the middle of the most symbolic constitutional gathering of the year, also not strength. When the chamber couldn't even pretend to be unified, again, not strength. What it was exposure. It was the curtain being pulled back on something that's been building for years. A government that no longer shares a common narrative, a political class that no longer shares a common language, a country that no longer shares a common emotional reality. And here's the part that no one wants to say out loud. When the people in that room stop believing in the idea of a union, the ordinary people, we feel it. Because we're not just watching politics, we're watching the emotional temperature of the country. We're watching the health of the institutions that are supposed to hold us. We're watching the people who represent us show us in real time how divided they are. And whether you're on the left or right or somewhere in the middle, you felt it. You felt the fracture, you felt the instability, you felt the mismatch between the words in the moment. From the center, you don't run from that feeling. You don't numb it, you don't spin it, you sit with it. Because the center is where you go when the noise gets too loud. The center is where you go when the narrative stops making sense. The center is where you go when you need to tell the truth without turning it into a weapon. And the truth is this: the state of our union is not strong. Not because of one president, not because of one party, not even because of one speech, but because the people who are supposed to model unity can no longer model even vaping. And that matters. It matters emotionally, it matters symbolically, it matters institutionally. Because when the ritual breaks, the meaning breaks. And when the meaning breaks, the whole country feels it. So today we're talking about like what it is to live in a moment where the rituals are cracking, where the institutions are wobbling, where the narratives are collapsing, where the center, the human center, is the only place left that feels honest. I want us to talk about what it means to hold space for grief, for skepticism, for unanswered questions, for the discomfort of watching a government that feels less like a union and more like a collection of competing realities. And I want us to think about what it looks like to stay awake in a moment like this, awake, grounded, and centered, without being pulled into the extremes that profit from our panic. Because if the union is fractured, then the center becomes more important than ever. Not the political center, the human one. The place where we can still tell the truth. The place where we can still feel without being manipulated. The place where we can still see clearly even when the people in power can't. So what does this mean for the ordinary people? For the people who aren't in the chamber, who aren't on camera, who aren't part of the performance? It means this. When the people in power stop sharing a story, the people they represent lose the thread too. Because honestly, most Americans aren't living in the extremes that we saw during the State of the Union address. Most Americans aren't screaming at each other in public spaces. Most Americans aren't trying to own anyone or the moment. Most Americans are just trying to get through the day with some dignity, some stability, in some sense that the people running the country are at least trying to keep the wheels on. And when we watch a State of the Union like the one we saw, ordinary people don't walk away thinking, wow, my side really crushed it. They walk away thinking, is anyone actually steering this thing? Because ordinary people feel the instability long before the institutions admit to it. We feel it in the cost of the groceries. We feel it in the tone of conversations at work. We feel it in the way the kids talk about their futures. We feel it in the exhaustion that comes from trying to stay informed without being swallowed in by the chaos. And we feel it and see it in a government that can't even pretend to be unified. It reinforces a fear that many people already carry quietly. If they can't hold it together, what does that mean for the rest of us? Well, from the center, you don't dismiss that fear. You don't shame it. You don't weaponize it. You name it. Because fear thrives in silence. But it softens when it's spoken out loud. And the truth is, ordinary people are tired, not apathetic. Tired. Not disengaged, but we are overwhelmed. And we're not uninformed, we're inundated. We're tired of being told that the other half of the country is the enemy. They're tired of being told that every election is the next apocalypse. We're tired of watching leaders treat governance like a sport and citizens like spectators. And here's the part that matters most. We start to feel like we're on our own. Not because we want to be, but because the people who are supposed to model unity are modeling something else entirely, contempt, and a kind of emotional volatility that trickles down into the culture. And that trickle down isn't economic, it's psychological. It shows up in the way that we talk to each other, and the way that we interpret disagreements, the way we brace ourselves before opening our social media because we never know what's going to come out of whose mouth, and the way we assume the worst about strangers. It shows up in the way we feel smaller, more isolated, and more unsure. Because when the people at the top stop believing in the idea of a union, the people at the bottom start wondering if the idea was ever real. But here's the thing that the extremes never say out loud. Ordinary people are the ones who actually hold the union together. Not the politicians, not the pundits, not the people in the chamber. It's the people in the grocery store, in the carpool lines, the people working double shifts. It's the people who still say good morning to their neighbors, even though they know they voted for, quote, the other guy. The people who still believe in fairness, decency, and shared humanity, even when the institutions don't model it. The center, the human center, lives out here, in our world, not in the room that they were in. And that's why this moment matters. Not because of the speech, not because of the theatrics, but because it revealed something we already knew but hadn't said out loud. The union isn't held together by the people on that stage. It's held together by the people watching from home. People who are tired, like we said, but not hopeless. People who are frustrated, but still willing to show up. People who are skeptical, but still capable of clarity, compassion, and courage. And that's where the center lives. Not in the middle of the aisle, but in the middle of real life. In a space where ordinary people keep choosing decency, even when our government doesn't. So when the president says the union is strong and the room says otherwise, the real question becomes, what do we say? What do the people who actually live in the union say? What do the people who feel the consequences say? What do the people who still believe in the possibility of something better say? Because the strength in the union has never been measured by applause lines. It's measured by the people who keep showing up for each other when the cameras are off. So as we close today, I want to bring us back to something simple, something human, something that doesn't depend on a chamber or the speech or the spectacle. The union has never been the strongest at the podium. It's always been strongest in the people, in the quiet ways we show up for each other, in the small acts of decency that never make the news, in the conversations where we choose curiosity over contempt, in the moments where we remember that disagreement doesn't erase our shared humanity. Because if the State of the Union showed us anything this year, it's that the government is struggling to hold their center. But that doesn't mean we have to lose ours. The center, the real center, isn't something the government gives us. It's something we build, it's something we practice. It's something we return to when the noise gets too loud and the narrative gets too sharp. And here's the hope I want to leave you with. The union is not defined by people arguing on camera. It's defined by people who keep living together off camera, people who still help their neighbors, people who still care about fairness. People who still want a future that feels livable, not just winnable. People who still believe that we can disagree without destroying each other. That's the part of the union that's still strong. That's the part that's still intact. That's the part that still gives me hope. Because the center is a posture, it's not a political position necessarily. It's the willingness to stay awake without becoming cynical. It's the courage to stay grounded without becoming numb. It's the choice to stay human in a moment that keeps trying to turn us into opponents. And if you're here and you're listening, and you're reflecting, and you're holding space for that kind of complexity, then you're already part of the center. You're already part of the thing that's holding this country together in ways the cameras will never capture. So take a breath, let your shoulders drop, let the noise settle for a moment. You don't have to fix the whole country at all. You just have to stay present in your corner of it. You have to keep choosing clarity over chaos, compassion over contempt, and connection over collapse. That's how the center holds. That's how the union heals. And that's how we move forward. Not perfectly, but honestly. I'll meet you back here next time, right in that middle space, where the truth lives, where grounding happens, and where hope still has room to breathe. I know tonight was a lot, guys, but I really want you to just kind of understand that I think a lot about our country and how we're just struggling so much. Individual people are struggling, the right's struggling, the left's struggling, the center's struggling. And it can get overwhelming if we don't keep these things in mind. And so like I said, I've been sitting on this State of the Union for about a month, and this is kind of what I came to. It's just that we can't fix it all. We all probably have our ideas about how to fix it. Um, but maybe right now, fixing it starts in like the individuality of us all. Like really being center driven, not being influenced by the extremes of the left or the right, emotionally, mentally, politically, spiritually, all of it. Just staying very center and true to who we are and being the kind of people that we want to be and need to be for ourselves, for our families, for each other. I don't know. I think moving forward, that is what's going to make our union strong. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Be safe.